for the next few minutes, I want to talk about governance and security. So part of you, all of you are here to kind of understand how cloud is going to help you, but how many of you are really concerned about governance or security? Right. So I see a couple of people already raising. So security is one of the primary things when I talk to customers, right? On why they are thinking about cloud, either on the positive side or on they are like concerned about security in the cloud, right? So let me talk about addressing some of those concerns. At the same time, governance is something that you want to think about from day one of your journey, rather than once you are in any cloud, then you're thinking about how do I govern this, right? Because believe me, it's going to get very fast. It is going to get pretty uncontrollable if you have all the gates open for your enterprises in the cloud, right? So we are going to talk about that. So my name is Mahesh Gurram. I'm a senior solutions architect at AWS. And I kind of work with customers day in and day out on trying to solve some of their challenges, both in cloud and on-premise and stuff. So that gives me some real good insight into what the customers are looking at. So we are going to kind of talk about why AWS initially for a couple of minutes, why you want to think about AWS. Then I'm going to talk about specifically governance and finally close off with security and some customer stories there. So why do we see customers doing AWS or in any cloud in general, right? One of the primary things is you want to think about security more from a fashion of if you are having a data center, you're hosting your data center, you're controlling everything, but you still have certain things that you're not really sure about who is coming in and what are the kinds of hardware you have and stuff like that, right? But just moving into something like AWS, which is being used by so many millions of customers, and also having their company like CIA and stuff like that using AWS. So just by becoming a customer of AWS, you're inheriting all those securities. But at the same time, you're also responsible for some of the security. So we take care of all the infrastructure, who comes into our data centers, who has control over them, and we don't even publish our data center locations. So pretty much no one really knows what it is, where they are, and stuff like that. And one of the other reasons I see normally customers even think about cloud in the first place is cost, right? So the TCO there basically means total cost of ownership. So when you are on premises, you are basically having everything scaled up, everything for your peak performance. So if you're thinking about something like Amazon.com, where we have our peaks in November or Prime Day, so our infrastructure should be peaked for that. Heavy load and maybe have some buffer on top of it, which is pretty much you're not using on a day-to-day basis, right? So when you think about cloud, you always think about pay-as-you-go model, ability to scale up and scale down and stuff like that. So that is one of the reasons I see customers having a lot of thought about cloud in general. And as I told you, scalability is extremely important. Resiliency is as well important. So in my experience as a developer and as an architect before, having a DR planned out and testing it and being ready for that is a huge task for any organization, right? You spend so much time planning for that, and when that event happens, not everything turns on very easily. So being resilient is important, but at AWS, one of the primary things we think about is infrastructure as code, right? Anything that you do should be code, which gives you that ability to take that exact code and replicate it anywhere in the world, right? And that gives you also the ability, like, for example, if you want to try out something in Asia or something like that, it is all you have to do is take the code and replicate it. And that also helps you with your DR now, because if something has to scale up, all you have to do is take the code and replicate it in a different region. And our chief technology officer always keeps saying, right, think everything will fail in your process, and it do, right? So if any architectures that you go through, whether it is on AWS or a different cloud or even on premises, always assume that every part of your architecture is going to fail, and what does that look like? So we basically have that enabled through infrastructure as a code. And also flexibility, I think, is extremely important when you think about AWS or any cloud, right? Because again, when you think about architectures that were built maybe in the early 2000s, where everything was hard dependency, right? So you had a specific application which was hardly dependent on a database, and that database was hardly dependent on something else. And now when you want to change the database version from V1 to V2, it involves so much regression testing, it involves so much impact analysis and all of that. And it is so rigid architecture. that even if you want to touch one piece of it, normally the business used to go back. Most of the time they're like, okay, I don't want to do that for the cost that you're telling me, right? For example, in my early days, I had a customer who wanted to add a couple of columns. The business said, I wanted to have these two new derived columns from the existing columns. And the estimate was, I think, $1 million or something. And the business could not justify that, right? So having architectures which are very flexible, where think about it more like you plug in a USB into your laptop, right? It should be that easy where you should be taking away any part of your architecture and replacing it with a newer, more sophisticated, more scalable architecture based on your needs, because needs keep changing, right? Like 5 years architecture on AWS for an application is no more the same today, because we have so many serverless architectures, we have Kubernetes, we have containers, and all of these new things that took up steam in the last 5 years. You want to have the ability and flexibility in your architectures to kind of adapt to the changing needs. And so a couple of differentiation factors that I really like at AWS is, personally, we have about 225 different services today, right? When you go to AWS website today and look at the services, we will have about 222, 25 or something like that. And the reason we do that is we want to be very specific on purpose-built solutions, right? Rather than trying to fit different architectures or different services into one, we basically try to have purpose-built. Let me give you an example. Like for databases, we have about 13 different database offerings today. Like for example, if you are trying to do a relational database, we have something called RDS, which is our relational offering. If you are doing a NoSQL kind of stuff, we have an offering. We also have offerings for the newer technologies like blockchain, time stream, and stuff like that, where if you want, or if your supply chain wants to use them, you have. Rather than trying to fit in a blockchain into some kind of NoSQL or a relational database, we kind of design it where you are basically thinking about more like a Lego block, right? So we have these Lego blocks, you put in your architecture, at the same time giving you that ability to, today, if I have some RDS, but I want to upgrade it to NoSQL, all you have to do is remove your RDS and put in a DynamoDB. All the connections and stuff are still intact, and you can basically use all of that. So that is something I really like, because it gives you that flexibility of adapting to newer architectures and stuff. Okay, sorry. So one of the challenges that I run into, it, especially on the governance side, is, okay, the cloud is amazing. People start to onboard onto AWS, but eventually what will happen is you have these individual teams who have these very small differences, right? So it could be line of businesses that you are in your team, or it could be this DevOps team, which is the first one to start your cloud journey, and they want to be on AWS. They started, and a different team comes in, they say, oh, I cannot reuse that because I have a different policy, and then they start their own account. And now you are running into this scenario where you have these multiple accounts. The management of that is going to be a nightmare. Your compliance team is going to say, hey, I really do not know what each individual team is doing. I don't know if you have some compliance like PCI. I don't know if all the services that they are using are compliant. And it's going to be a nightmare for you, both from a security standpoint and also from governing your data, governing how many accounts do I have, who has control to what, and stuff like that. So that is where I want to talk about a couple of primary things. One is called Control Tower, where it is an offering of AWS, which is one of the services where we understand these scenarios where you need to have these multiple accounts, right? Even in one account, you might need accounts for development, production, UAT, and stuff like that. So we understand all of that. So with Control Tower, you will be able to basically deploy any number of accounts and then still have that controlled access within your organization, right? So think about it as having one primary account, then you will have one account by default for logging. So anything that happens within your account, sub-accounts will be logged into that. All your network you can control through another account. So that way you have the control about what is the traffic that is coming in, what is the traffic that is going out. A good example maybe this week that happened was, there was this new ban from the government of United States saying there should not be any traffic from certain regions within Ukraine with the Ukraine and Russia war going on, right? So they wanted to block any specific traffic coming in from something like Donbass or Crimea region. So how do you have all of that? If you have multiple accounts, maintaining it would, or adding those rules, firewall rules would be extremely, extremely difficult into these hundreds of accounts that you have to maintain. But using something like Control Tower, all you have to do is in your network control, in your network account, you could enable saying, geo IP blocking, and then you're all done, right? That way you can easily control what is going on and stuff. And now you have that specific control. And when someone comes in with a new account, you could still add them into this entire environment. So you are still controlling everything on that. The next one is AWS organizations, which I think again is really useful, especially if you have existing accounts and now you want to get all of them, right? So behind the scene control tower uses organizations, but think about organization more like a hierarchy, right? You have this master account and then you have these individual accounts. And for each individual account, we basically call them our organization units. And within an organization unit, you could have something like developer organization unit, stuff like that. The idea there is you basically have a hierarchy of different accounts, set accounts into different projects, and then have different controls. So when a project is done, all you have to do is disable the organization unit and you're pretty good. So we have, the idea there is both of them are easily scalable, and both of them, again, everything that we do pretty much is an API call within AWS, right? So everything that you do can be written in a script. So, and automation is pretty much at the center of all of it. Again, going back to that initial challenge I always talk about from a governance standpoint is how do I, when I add a new account, how do I automate these checks? How do I automate they are governed? How do I automate if someone is opening up this account, or someone is opening this S3 bucket for public? How do I control that? So all of these rules can be built into Control Tower. And as I said, you can actually establish guardrails. You can check for the guardrails. You can check for different rules that you have on the fly. So rather than being someone manually going in, again, all these rules that I'm talking about can be scripted, and you can basically upload them. That way, if something is going on, someone is opening up an S3 bucket with a public access, you immediately get notified. And even you can also have certain controls where they cannot do certain activities. Again, Control Tower at a high level is, okay, I don't know if you I don't think you can see, but the Control Tower basically is where you can set up this entire multi-account environment within the cloud very easily without anything, with a click of a button pretty much on the service, or if you are doing a script just by an API call, you can set it up and you can add accounts, you can remove accounts, and all of those very easy. Organizations, again, is really good, especially when you want to have controls. Again, some of the benefits of organizations could be, let's say we are doing a Python 3.9 today, and you are using it across all environments, and something like a log4j vulnerability comes up, and you want to patch all of them, right? So using organizations, you can basically say, across all my accounts, give me a list of EC2 instances where that is being used, and very easily, just with a single command, kind of patch it across, right? And that will give you a lot more control on what is going on. And also, this will also enable you to kind of understand, kind of from a billing standpoint, on who is the one that is billing you and stuff like that, right? And so you also have benefits on things like what you want to enable in specific accounts. So for example, we have 225 services, as I said. You could have, say, my developer's account should only have 100 of those, right? Because I need PCI compliance and stuff like that. So you could only enable 100 of them in your developer accounts, right? So they cannot really do anything. And also we have instances which are like, I think the biggest instance we have has a RAM of 64 terabytes or something like that. That's a crazy amount of RAM for any application, but it is expensively costly to do that, right? I think it's $140 an hour or something like that. And in early days of my AWS journey, I accidentally launched an instance like that and I forgot about it over the weekend, right? So my organization got built pretty heavy for that. But with something like Control Tower, you could basically have checks and balances in place, right? So you could say if an instance is not being used, more than 5% of the CPU automatically shut it down, or give me a recommendation based on, this is my workload. Give me a recommendation, where should I run? Should I run it on a Lambda? Should I run it on a container? Should I run it on an EC2 instance? Stuff like that, right? And basically enabling all of those insights is what organizations does, not at an account level, but also at an enterprise level, because that insight at an enterprise level, I think, is extremely useful, because at an account, you're just one account, you're trying to do your project. But as an enterprise architecture team, when you're trying to look at your broader organization, maybe the insights would be really helpful to dive more deep and identify those patterns, right? So yeah, organizations basically, as I said, you can create accounts, add accounts, basically group accounts, what we call organization units, and then apply policies on those grouped account service control policies. That's where you say that these are the things that I allow, these are the things I don't allow. And you could also say that I only want my developers to launch anything like a M1, like a large instance, but not anything more than that. So you could basically control all of that. So yeah, so the key takeaways here, right, from a governance standpoint, things I want you to take away from this is anything that you do, think about multi-account, right? With whichever cloud you are, right? To be honest, I want you to be on AWS. I want you guys to use AWS primarily, but whichever account you are on, whichever cloud you are on, always think about how are you going to have those multi-account, because if you are not there today, eventually you are getting to that very soon, right? Because you will have those conversations with your teams on having multiple accounts for different regions. It could be different regions like prod, UAT, or it could be different line of businesses having different compliance, different needs, having different accounts. So always think about how are you going to take that multi-account strategy and put it into your architecture. The other thing I want you to think about is having flexibility with AWS. I have seen this a lot. When I started with AWS, it was about 3 years ago. We had about 160 services. We are now at 225. So things change. So always have your architectures have that ability to adapt to the changing needs, right? So with AWS, we provide you with some of those in the form of solution architects that you have. So talk to the solutions architects and normally help you with whether the architecture that you're coming up is scalable, is it performance efficient, is it cost optimized and stuff. And always try to talk to one of us who are AWS folks. We have a bunch of them in Atlanta. So I know most of your companies have a solutions architect that are assigned. So if you feel free to talk to us and let us know if you have any questions. We are happy to help on that, right? And we have a lot of blogs that we publish. I think the LogicWorks folks talked about well-architected framework. That I think is a huge thing. If you look at the well-architected white paper that we have, right, it really talks about how we think from a design perspective a cloud architecture should look like. You will not find any reference on AWS in there, so feel free to read irrespective of the cloud, but you will have some really interesting questions that they ask about on how do you think about security? How do you think about governance? How do you think about each of the 5 pillars, right? Even sustainability is a new pillar. So if you are on AWS, we recently added this sustainability impact. So you kind of, based on your workload, we tell you how much impact on the environment your workload is having, right? And we have multiple blogs with the multiple specializations. So if there is something that interests you, feel free to sign up for that. You get an automated email every morning, not every morning, whenever there is a new blog, right? So.
Mahesh, I have a question.
Sure.
So the control tower, the services access, can that be linked to rollback access if you're having RBAC in terms of who's accessing your projects and things like that inside the control tower?
Yes.
So that can be linked to the services that AWS is offering inside.
Yes. So we basically in control tower.
Yeah. Could you just repeat the question for some of the people who are remote so they could hear it as well? Okay. Yeah, you just need to speak. Just.
Oh, speak up.
Yeah, no, okay. Repeat the question because I'm not sure they heard it.
Oh, okay.
Because the microphone's closer to you.
Yeah. So I think the question is more like you want to know what are the activities that are being performed in the individual accounts and how Control Tower can help with that. So basically what happens is everything that you do on AWS environment is logged into what they call cloud tray, right? Anything that you do, even from a very simple API call. And within Control Tower, you basically take those cloud trails from individual accounts and then stream them into a logging account. So everything is maintained in that logging account in an S3 bucket. So basically you can go and query that very simply like an SQL query using something like Athena, which can read files and have that SQL like. So I have seen people do some kind of automatic detection and stuff like that. We will get to that in a second in the security features, but yeah. Sure. So what so that was the governance piece of that, and I was just going to go into security. Any questions on the governance that we talked about? Okay. So coming to security, one of the primary things, like when you think about someone doing on-prem work or someone doing anything, one of the challenges they will tell you is they do not really have a lot of automation built into that, right? So let me give you an example. If something is happening within certain threshold, it is very tough from a security standpoint to detect it, because there is not a lot of automation and there is not so much impact in doing that analysis, right? So one of the challenges with anything like that is once you start automating it, and for example, maybe a certain port could be open only for a minute, accidentally, that could happen. So detecting stuff like that and learning from that is extremely important, right? So having that visibility into what happened yesterday and trying to automate that so that does not repeat is extremely important. And basically, those are some of the primary challenges that I see. So I don't know how many of you ran into this, but with my development background, back in the day when I was doing primary development, there were two teams that I always ran into with issues, right? In the sense, whenever I wanted to do something really fast, I always had pushback from either compliance team or the security team saying, hey, I do not want you to implement this new technology or this new software because the security team didn't vet it out, didn't make sure that it is pretty good or it is not compromising any of the company's data, which is what they are supposed to do, which is what the team wants. But from my standpoint, as a developer who is an enthusiast and wants to do something really quick, wants to try out this new technology, I had this challenge of, should I move fast or should I stay secure kind of dilemma, right? But moving into cloud, you basically can do both, right? And how do we do both of them is because we have this vetted at AWS, security is job zero, right? So anything that we do, we will always think about security, and we will also help you vet that out with your individual teams as well. Okay. Let me go back at the So, and when you think about the customers that we have on AWS, right, we have some really important customers like banking customers who have multi-country banking systems that are there. Like HSBC is a really good example. We also have Southwest, which is one of the primary airline carriers, and how they use AWS to make sure their data is secured and all of that, right? With Southwest, they have also a lot of IoT data, which is streaming into AWS. So, and stuff like that. Again, as a company, when you're thinking about cloud and when you're moving about it, think more about from a security standpoint on how we can do that, right? So things like, how can anything that I'm building, right? A new application or a new architecture that I'm building, how can it be by inherent? Is there an automated way that I can say, this is compliant or this is not compliant, right? Again, how do we do that is through infrastructure as code. You will be able to scan that code and say, hey, this is compliant or this is not compliant. Again, based on the different privacy needs that you have, you could basically say, for example, if your business is in Europe, you might have a different data privacy standard than when you are running only in US, right? So having all of that built in, saying that if you are deploying the same stack in Europe, you have to think about security in Europe, right? So stuff like that. How do I make sure the data is not flowing out of Europe is a question that you want to start thinking about. And again, building all of that and then automating all of that is where any cloud can help you with that, and AWS specifically with the IaaS, right? And as you can see, we have multiple customers who have, and we also have multiple certifications, because sometimes your auditors will need certain certifications. And as you can see, we have FedRAMP, we have CSA, ISO, and whatnot, pretty much across the globe. Most of the certifications are there. The only thing I will caution you here is when you are using a specific service, make sure it is compliant, because all these compliance that we have here are not for all services. So as you are thinking about individual services, just make sure what is the architecture framework you are trying to implement it, and what are the compliance it needs, and does it comply with the standards, and basically involve your risk team initially itself, right? And finally, because everything is secured, everything is automated, everything is anything that you do is automatically detected through scripts, it is easy for you to scale. At the same time, it is easy for you to detect any of the outliers very easily and be more of a reactive than a proactive approach. And the primary things that you want to think about, the data residency requirements. Where is your data going to sit? Is it being encrypted both at rest and in transit, right? That is one thing that you want to always think about, especially within the cloud, most of the time the data is secure, but when you're getting the data into the cloud, make sure it is encrypted, make sure it is secured and also sometimes certain applications or certain auditory needs might be there where you have to use your specific keys. So make sure you always comply with all of those. And basically we have tools, we have a key management service, which will help you with that. Finally, I think the first thing is trying to think about everything as an API. It's called it's called API economy. So think about as you're building new applications, as you're building new architectures, always think about that APIs are the central for everything. That way you can be going back to that initial thing about flexibility. The initial thing about flexibility of your architecture and also having everything automated and also the response being automated. So if you are getting a traffic from an area that you are not knowing, you should automatically respond to that very effectively and very easily. And we basically, from a security standpoint, we have multiple services. As I said, we have about 220 different services spread across different lines, right? So all the way from identity and access management to detection of when something goes wrong. We have multiple services. As you can see, we have security hub, guard duty, and all of those. We also have firewall control. So infrastructure, when you are getting traffic in from areas that you are not expecting, how do you control that? For data protection, we have a lot of tools here, right? Summary here is of this page is we have different services spread across to cover those specific lines that we are talking about. So if something that you see here interests you or some challenges that you are running into today, let me know. I would be happy to engage in a conversation and try to point you to the right directions there. And we also have a lot of customers. We partner with multiple of them like Okta, LogicWorks, SUSE, and yeah, pretty much everyone that is out there, we partner with them today. So I know I'm running out of time. So primarily, this is one slide I wanted to talk about is what we call the shared security model. So we take care, that is the one that you see in orange kind of stuff is what AWS take care, but anything within AWS, we expect you to take care on building the boundaries around that, right? So it is going to be extremely important that you are responsible for your data, you are responsible for what kind of encryption you want to do. We encrypt by default, but most of the time, if there are specific privacy needs, data residency needs, you need to understand, make sure you understand. And as a whole, we want to make sure you get everything in the cloud from a security standpoint. And yeah, pretty much, I think this is my last slide. So from a customer's standpoint, the idea here is we basically cover most of the hardware, like from the hardware side, we take care of the security and stuff, anything above like specific software based on the different services that you use. Some of them we do, some of them we do not. For example, networking, you need to have those firewalls enabled. And pretty much the customer data is where you kind of control who has that customer data or what platforms you should use, are they compliant with yours or not, stuff like that. Okay, I think that's my last slide.